All right, guys.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
This is the first ever Kong community call. We're pretty stoked about it. We're gonna have these things once a month. For a while, they're gonna move around in weeks because we wanted them to be earlier in the month, but they'll probably settle around the second week of the month. The goal for these calls is to provide a place for community members to present their work with Kong, have a place to talk about the community, have a place to talk about new developments with the technology. And so if you have ideas about what you want to talk about on this call, we hope it will be driven by you. So the agenda doc is open. I've put it in the chat and I'll chat it back in there one more time. If you could all do me a favor and just put your name in the agenda doc so that we know who came to the meeting, that would be super helpful. So for this specific meeting, we have Jeremy and Ross, who you guys will probably all know from Kong Nation, which is our forum and other Kong channels, who are going to demo one of the many plugins that they've built for Kong at Optum. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Kong Summit. We are going to have a 1.0 Q&A session. And between those things, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves so that we can all start a conversation. So with that introduction, I'm going to kick it over to Jeremy and Ross, who are going to talk about their plugin that they built.
Sounds good.
Sure. So Jeremy, you want to grab the screen?
Yeah, right. Now you have to stop sharing, right?
Sure. So while Jeremy gets that sorted, like, who are we? So Optum is a company which, among other things, provides IT services to the healthcare industry. We're part of United Health Group, which is 5th on the Fortune 500 list, so we're a pretty large company. And as part of an overall effort to modernize our stack, we've been evaluating Kong for about the past year. During this time, we've created several small, relatively simple plugins that fit our specific needs and use cases. And we've open sourced, I think, 8 of them that we think the community should be able to benefit from as well. And one of these plugins is called Kong Spec Expose. And the idea behind this plugin is this plugin allows allows Kong to expose an API interface to a customer. So this is like a Swagger, an open API spec, a WSDL, a Waddle, just some type of API interface. And let me back up a minute and unpack the problem here. So right now, if I'm an API provider and I have an open API spec, I basically have 2 avenues for how I could possibly expose this to one of my consumers. The first is if we just expose this as part of the proxy, then the consumer does what they need to do to register for auth, and they can just call the endpoint that would give them that document using auth through the proxy. And the second one would be to give the consumer the direct URL to this spec. And both of these have problems. The first involves a delay in development and sort of just a general reduction in efficiency for how fast a consumer could get onboarded with an API. And the second one presents a relatively severe security risk in that the consumer needs to be able to A, connect to the actual API upstream directly, and B, know what that is, and 3, do so without auth. So the point of Kong Spec Expose is to give a standard endpoint for each Kong proxy that we publish that will allow a consumer to gain access to an open API spec, a WSDL, a Waddle, or what have you. And you can sort of see the comparison on this slide where the standardization that we would do is we would expose that endpoint on /spec-z for any given proxy. And I'll turn it over to Jeremy, and he's going to give you a little bit of a live demo of what this looks like.
Sure. Yeah, so first I want to show you a given service endpoint. Right here you can see in my browser the gateway endpoint with API Pet Store v1. And you can see when I'm trying to hit the service directly in browser with just an HTTP GET, we get an error code. Access token is missing. That is because this proxy is secured with OAuth 2 client credential pattern. So if I were to go to the /spec-z path added to the URI, you can see a JSON document is returned. This JSON document is the spec that contains information about what the request the API expects, as well as the response the API would return to a given consumer. And if you wanted to browse this programmatic spec here in a human readable format, you can use something like Swagger Inspector here to evaluate the spec-z path. And then you can see here on the user interface, we see the different methods that this API exposes and the different resources you can manipulate, from HTTP GETs to HTTP posts to deletes. And that's essentially how the SpecZ plugin provides values to our API providers as well as our consumers. And I think we also want to talk a little bit about what it's been like to integrate with Kong and develop plugins as well.
Yeah, so when we've done, I think we've developed 11 plugins, 8 of which we've made open source. The 3 we haven't are just, there's no real possibility that anybody in the community could benefit from this type of logic. It really is specific to our company. We've run into some positives and negatives during this process, and I'll talk about a couple of them. So probably the biggest positive, and something that I'm afraid might get overlooked kind of often, is the general structure of a Kong plugin. The way that arguments are taken in by a schema, the way that handler manages the incoming request, like just this structure has made it so easy for Jeremy and I, who were complete Lua novices before starting to work with Kong. We'd never heard of the language, we'd never touched the language. So just having that structure and having that standardization and being able to work with that has really helped us to expedite the efficiency of our development. Something that I'll just throw in here as a con that we've definitely run into is the relative lack of any type of robust debugging framework for when we're actually doing this development. So what we've typically done for debugging is we're just using Nginx error statements to print debugging information to standard out and kind of going about it that way. And there's nothing wrong with that, really. I mean, that's more or less the first way that anybody ever learns to debug a thing. But compared with some of the tools and some of the resources that are available for other languages, it is a little bit lacking, and it does slow down the process a little bit. This is compounded by the fact that we're often working with like very specific Nginx and Kong, I guess, variables that we couldn't reproduce in a more standardized Lua test bench. So we end up having to build and redeploy our Kong every time we want to test a new iteration of one of these plugins, which isn't, so it's not a big problem for us. We're deployed in a cloud Dockerized environment, so it doesn't take up too much time. It's just a little bit slower than it might be with other platforms and other languages. And I think that there might be room for improvement there. But to kind of finish with a positive, working with the Lua package manager, Lua Rocks, has been also definitely a great part of developing these plugins. Just the ease of installation, the ease of uploading a rock, how uncomplicated the whole process is, how when you have a specific Kong plugin, Lua Rocks is smart enough to install that to the correct directory such that that information is accessible to Kong. These are all definite positives that we've seen during our development cycle, and I'm happy that you guys have that type of relationship with the package manager. So that's just at a very high level what I've seen with debugging, with proxy or plugin development in general. Jeremy, do you have anything to add?
And yeah, just to add to that, I think also plugin development has been very smooth with Kong, simply because of Kong, the company itself. All their engineers are very helpful. You can go to the community forum and post questions, ideas you have for a plugin, and within the same day you usually get a response with an idea on how to build your plugin and how to integrate that, and which Nginx phase you would use and the variables you'd use to access it. So that kind of help is unparalleled. Even with paid vendor support, you don't get that kind of integration support and availability from engineers, which is just really great to see with Kong. It's definitely a change from what we're used to.
Yeah, I spent my first year and a half supporting, and I'm not going to name names, but supporting a large, popular proprietary vendor product. And I have to say, starting to work really for the first time with the open source community with Kong has completely opened my eyes to the difference in development between these two sort of magisteria. Working with the vendor, it was always a struggle to get responses. When you did, they were generic and canned. But being able to just go on the Kong forum and have a detailed discussion about issues with the actual Kong developers, and the level of support we've seen from the community is so wildly superior to the type of relationship and the type of support and the results that you will see from the vendor integration, that I think this old idea that in order for a platform to be really stable and to be proper for an enterprise solution, that it needs vendor support is totally wrong-headed these days. And my experience with Kong is basically why I think that now. But so Jeremy, if you didn't have anything to add to that, I'd love to open it up for questions.
Jeremy, anything to add?
Yeah, no, that's it for me. Does anybody have any questions about the plugin or about our integrations with Kong?
And everyone, when you join the call, we joined you on mute, but you can feel free to unmute yourselves for questions. That is 100% welcome. Or if you feel more comfortable chatting them into the chat window, you can click the little chat button that's on your bottom menu, or maybe your top menu bar, and you will be able to chat.
Cool.
Scott would probably throw it back over to, yeah.
Oh yeah, so we have a question from Cooper Marcus, who says, Jeremy, do you face any challenges from your management regarding open sourcing? So like, what do you have to do in
open
order
sourcing your
Right. Yeah, open sourcing our plugins. Our process is a little bit clunky. It involves using a couple of bad applications that are old for documenting out the plugin we're trying to open source and basically getting approval from a person that kind of forms up our legal documents that we put into the repos as well. But it's kind of just a manual process where we get basically executive approval to open source our application. And as soon as we get that approval, we have to go through a security evaluation from a person that kind of just inspects the Lua code to make sure that there's no Optum branding or documentation that's incorrect. And once we get the 2 check marks from both the legal side as well as the security side, they give us access to the Optum GitHub repo where we can put all of our applications. So it's not that bad at all from a management perspective.
In general, I like to think that this company is shifting more, especially at a leadership level, towards an open source oriented idea of doing things. We are a large organization in total. There's more than 200,000 employees that work in this company. So not Optum specifically, but the parent company in general. So there's a lot of minds to change, but I think management, and especially Jeremy and I's direct management, has been supportive in this effort. And it's really not too bad.
Hey, this is Jeff. As Jeremy and Russ's direct management, I'm fully supportive of their efforts to to open source.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey.
Hey, this is Raja. You just went through past like in 2 minutes. I couldn't catch everything, but I need to check this separately.
Yeah, so Jeff and Raja are in fact Jeremy and I's direct management. So as you can see, they are on this call. Like this is a change that I'd like to see that I think is more or less industry wide as open source becomes more popular, as the results of the process become more proven. I think you'll see that more large organizations will start to see value in this and will start to invest in it. I think Optum is one of the first to really do so at this level.
That makes us really happy. We're very happy that you're moving forward with open source. Thank you, Russ and Jeremy. I think that was a great demo. I do have a question for you. So you've open sourced your plugins, and you've open sourced a number of those. I think 8 by now.
Yes.
Yep.
What is your plan regarding the maintenance of those plugins? Do you have new features? Any roadmap items that you'd like to address, or have you received bug fixes? Do you plan on maintaining them on the long run as well?
Absolutely. So every time that Jeremy and I encounter a problem or have a bug reported to us, we do make sure to change the open source repo. We change the GitHub. We change what's on the package manager. Keeping this up to date is important to us, not just for the support of the community, although that's obviously a concern, but also because we build directly from Lua Rocks. Like that is how we deploy our services. So in order for our product to be effective, we need to keep the open source versions of this stuff up to date. And I think that is the way to do it. It's definitely not correct to have a forked private company repo where the latest and greatest lives and then everything, that's just not, that defeats the point of this whole process. And I think the community does have a lot to add with respect to the quality of these things.
Great, thank you, Russ. I think we have another question from the chat. Judith,
Yeah. So it looks like we have a question. The developer portal of Enterprise Edition already has the means to expose spec for API. Is the Kong Spec Expose automatically picking the spec up from the route or service configured?
I think a question for
I mean, the way it works basically is we will take the specific URL that exposes the spec in the schema. I mean, that's the way that the Kong Spec Expose plugin works. So it's not using any kind of, it's not smart enough to be able to examine all possible endpoints on the API, on the upstream to figure out which is the spec. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question, right?
I think the question also assumes that the plugin is built for the Enterprise Edition of Kong, but Russ and Jeremy are users of Kong open source. So I don't think the plugin does any kind of integration with the Enterprise Edition.
No, but as far as what you can configure the plugin on, whether you configure it on a route or a service would be up to you. The plugin could be configured globally for that matter if your gateway is only fronting one API. How you enable the plugin on top of the Kong resources is up to you. They provide that flexibility.
And you know, this is a simple plugin, right? Most of what we have open sourced is relatively simple, if only because the problems we've encountered admit of simple solutions. So, I mean, you know, feel free to take a look at the source code of it, and if you have questions, post a GitHub issue, and we'll be sure to respond. But yeah.
Absolutely. Well, one area is that I was thinking you were going to mention as part of the cons while developing the plugin was the, you know, you could say the lack of a test framework or the lack of a, you know, an externalized test framework that is independent from Kong that, you know, you can install independently and then assume that Kong is installed in your system and test the plugin on the Kong test instance and have some sort of utility methods. So how did you test the plugin? And then we can elaborate into what our plans are for our test framework.
Yeah, so I mean, basically what we did, and I kind of covered a little bit of this, but what we've done effectively is for debugging, we use Nginx error statements to log debugging info to standard out, and we basically just build and redeploy every time we need to test. On deployment, on like go live, there isn't necessarily like what would be the equivalent of a JUnit, which I would really like to have. So that's something that stands for improvement. But yeah, testing in the most basic sense. We have a development environment. We make changes. We push those changes. We see if they work. If they don't, we make more changes. We push those changes. Okay. Being on a cloud platform makes this not too bad, but it's still pretty clunky.
Right. I was more referring to, yes, to unit tests integrated within your repository and the ability to, you know, run them locally so that you can make sure that your change don't inject any regressions or anything, and then be able to deploy when you feel confident with it.
I'd love suggestions for that, but because at the moment we don't have a solution that fits that.
Oh, okay, yeah. I don't know if we should elaborate now.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So there are two ways to approach this today. If you are using Kong and have installed Kong locally, you have access in your Lua modules to the spec helpers module, which is a module that allows you to start and stop Kong. A test instance, and you can also specify your own like custom plugins. So you can, you know, inject and declare to the test instance that you have a test plugin to run, and you give it the name of the plugin, and the test instance will load your custom plugin. Then, still in the setup phase, you can make a few admin API calls via helper functions as well that will configure Kong a certain way, say add a route, add a service, a consumer, configure the plugin and the consumer. And then you enter the test cases, where you can have n test cases, and each of them it's a very kind of declarative test framework in which you describe what is the behavior you're expecting to see in the test. You implement a function that will run and will execute the test. And the test will be make the request via the proxy port instead of the admin API, right? And test that the status code and the body match whatever you're expecting. And that is doable with the spec helpers module if Kong is installed locally. on the development machine. That is the case for the Vagrant image as well. So if you want to develop plugins, the Vagrant image is a very easy way to get started as well with all the dependencies included. The other possibility that we've also been exploring more recently when we ourselves start developing plugins that we develop externally as part of another Git repository is a more full end-to-end integration approach, kind of, where the functions that are used to start and stop Kong assume that Kong is installed, but it doesn't use the spec helpers plugin. And that way we are able to start a Kong instance via commands as if we were a regular user. And then, so literally via command lines from the CLI. So we spawn a shell from the test script that starts Kong with the given configuration, thanks to all the environment variables, settings, etc. And then we configure it via Lua REST HTTP, Lua HTTP, or any other way. And we're also write our test cases after that. So we kind of follow both approaches. Of course, in Kong itself, we use the spec helpers module. In the long term, we do have the vision of a test framework that would be independent of Kong, that would assume Kong is installed, but wouldn't use the spec helpers utility of Kong itself, which we reserve the right to break at any time when we develop Kong. So for a native, isolated, more independent test framework, the idea would be utility functions to do all these things that do not break and support all test cases, not the ones that we encounter here when we develop Kong, but also the ones that the community encounters when the community develops custom plugins. And regarding debugging statements, the one addition we made in the PDK was the inclusion of the kong.log.inspect function, which is a global that you can use at any time, that will pre-print anything that it's being given to. So any argument.
Oh, cool. Tables, yeah, all that kind of stuff.
If you have
that would be so.
For example, we're going to pre-print it for you, and it's a variadic function, so you can construct your own debug logs and add many arguments and log several tables at once. And you'll use
awesome.
Jeremy, we have used that inspect module, and I don't know.
Yeah, but this one is included in Kong. So I'm not referring to the inspect module that you can install via LuaRocks, but really of a one that is included in Kong with the plugin development kit. That's what I was referring to, PDK, which allows you to call Kong, the global.log.inspect. And this way you don't have to install inspect, and you don't have to require it, etc. And the good
the Kong Summit.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Great. So next on our list, it looks like we have, Ross has already introduced himself. So
yes, and Jeremy too.
Jeremy too. So Yvonne, do you want to unmute and tell us all about you and what got you interested in Kong, please?
Okay, we are back on the other
on the other computer.
Where it looks like Yvonne isn't with us or doesn't want to share. So that's fine.
That is all right. I think also perhaps they were having a little problem with their microphone the last time we talked to them. So there's that as well. So the next person on the list is Ganesh. Ganesh, do you want to say hi and what got you interested in Kong?
Hi, my name is Ganesh. I work for Opinion International Groups, and we are trying to explore Kong as an API gateway for our enterprise solution. That's where I'm in, not attending any Kong summit so far, but we are trying to evaluate Kong Community Edition as well as the enterprise version of it.
Awesome, that's really cool. Have you demoed it or anything, or is this like the start of your journey so far?
This is the start of our journey. We have many of our use cases. We are trying to see where Kong can help on this.
Awesome, really, really cool. I think next we have Alex. Alex says, I don't have a mic, unfortunately. I I work for a retail in the Midwest where we've been using Kong since January, really enjoying working with Kong and developing some plugins. Oh, that's really, really cool. Have you, by any chance, used the PDK yet, or have you been developing all of those plugins prior to the PDK?
PDK being the plugin development kit that was released in 0.14. Just clarifying in case anybody joined before we started, since we started talking about it. We're gonna take him some time to type. And then we have Marcelo.
All right, Marcelo, do you want to say hi?
Hello, guys. Yeah, my name is Marcelo de Cruz. I'm with McAfee. As I type on the notes, I think I was in the summit last week. Been using Kong for 3 years. First plugin we developed against version 0.7. I do remember the spec helpers, by the way. That's awesome. That was a lot of help for unit testing. Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us,
Thanks
Marcelo.
for joining.
It's really nice to see you again. So next up, we have Jeff. Jeff, do you want to unmute and say hi and what brought you to Kong?
So if Jeff is unavailable, Jeff Melby is our direct manager, Jeremy and I's direct manager. So his reasons are similar to ours.
Great. And so Alex replied to your question, Judy.
Yes, it looks like Alex says that they had developed 2 plugins prior to the PDK and did try it out yesterday. So awesome. Thank you.
With a link to the
This
GitHub
is
repo.
very
So
cool.
if anybody wants to have a look.
Here we go. It's going in the agenda doc.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Great.
There we go. That is very, very cool, Alex. Thank you. And then lastly, we have Panagis. I probably butchered your name. I'm really sorry. Do you want to unmute and correct me, please?
Yeah. Hi, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi.
Oh, hi. I'm Panagis. Panagis. Yeah, I'm from Greece. I work for a company that actually handles services that have to do with public and private transportation, with buses and stuff. We handle ticket services, routing services, even financial services of those public and private transportation companies. And we started using Kong about a year and a half ago, based on 0.10, if I remember correctly. Because we wanted to make a new kind of infrastructure for all those services, and we wanted to start relying on microservices and stuff. And after a decent time of research we made, we found Kong, and we were really excited about it. So we started using Kong from that time on, from our services. That's about it. Yeah, I haven't been to the summit. I'm in Greece. Okay, but I've been following Kong community for a while now, and I want to say congratulations, guys, for everything you have done.
Awesome.
Also, hi, Jeremy.
Hey, glad to see you made it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think I have seen your name online a few times. Yeah.
I've actually designed and developed Konga.
Yes.
Yeah.
I knew this raised there. I remember. Yes. Great. Nice to have you here. Thank you for joining us today. It's great.
Glad to meet you guys. Glad to meet you again.
Pleasure to have you.
That's very, very cool. We also have a couple of people in the room. So in case you don't know me, hi, I'm Judith. I'm the developer marketing manager. This is Thibault. Thibault, do you want to introduce yourself and say what brought you to Kong?
My name is Thibault. I have been working on Kong since the very first days. Where Kong came from, Meetup, the API marketplace, was the proxy that we used to develop our API marketplace. It was the underlying proxy, taking the requests from API consumers to API providers, and then we would do all of the monitoring and all of the load balancing and everything for them. So we externalized Kong made it open source. And today my role here at Kong is principal engineer, and I maintain open source repository and product with the help of the entire team. So we have a numerous amount of developers working on Kong from the company as well as from the community. We have several teams. I'm not sure if any of them is here today, but if they would like to introduce themselves. I see. I do see we have Marco here, we have Shashi on the call, who is also a Kong employee, who has worked on Kong as well, and Darren as well.
Cool.
If I didn't miss anybody else who's contributed and worked on Kong, you know.
Do any of the Kongers
want
to say hi?
Show your faces.
Yes, exactly.
Hi there, I will. Hi, I'm Cooper. I'm a Konger, and I lead our ecosystem, which around here means the Kong Hub, which just launched at Kong Summit, the best place to find and share things that make Kong even better. Big thanks to Jeremy for your pre-launch contributions, Jeremy and your colleagues for your pre-launch contributions to the Kong Hub. Thanks very much. And an invitation to all of the community to come and add your favorite integrations and plugins to the Kong Hub. It's part of our docs.konghq.com site. It's docs is code, and you add things by making pull requests against our docs site repo. We'll make sure that the URL is in the show notes.
It's already there.
Awesome. Thank you, Judith.
And note that Cooper said plugins and integrations. So we do not exclusively accept plugins on the Kong Hub, but also any sort of integration, installation methods, and other Cooper can probably develop if he feels the needs to.
Cool.
Okay.
Any other Kongers want to unmute and say hi?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Hi, Darren.
Hi, Darren.
We can...
Hey, just wanted to say hello. I work on Kong, and this is exciting.
Awesome. And Marco, do you want to say hi?
Hello, this is
Come
Marco.
over here.
Hello, this is Marco.
Marco
needs no
Marco is our
introduction.
co-founder and CTO. So Marco also worked on Kong since day one. And today, Marco leads the office of the CTO here at Kong.
Most of the bugs from the early days are mine. I'm just kidding. This is amazing, by the way. This community and the conversation I've been listening to, it's very productive, and I'm really looking forward to do more and more of these kind of sessions.
Awesome. Cool.
See you next month.
I want to add to actually. So hi, my name is Shashi. Even I'm like working right from the beginning days of Kong, and it looks like feel great. Like we're moving towards like how like I remember creating my first plugin, and now like we have SDK and all those things. So it still makes me happy like where we're going. Same time, like I also want to add like all these community plugin really strengthen like Kong as a big like platform, but same time we also need a setup for a more of a scanning thing. Like we need to be more responsible while using those plugins, basically, right? They are treated as a first class like citizen in the Kong itself. So probably we'll work towards a system where we can scan all those plugins for vulnerabilities and all those things. Make sense?
Yes, that's lovely.
Yes,
Thank you,
Shashi.
Shashi.
Thanks. Thanks for showing your face too. Okay.
Cool.
Great.
So the next thing on our agenda is actually a Kong Summit recap. So I just thought that we would share here all of Jeremy's slides in case they weren't going to work. Cool. So we had our first in-person conference, which was Kong Summit. It was on September 18th and 19th in San Francisco. It was really, really great. We had more than 200 people come, it was a pretty packed event. And so I was really glad to hear about that. If you want to check out all the social media that happened around it, we had a hashtag that got used prolifically. And I thought that what we would do is just give a little bit of background on what happened at the summit, and then also because there were a bunch of product announcements that were really, really cool. And then maybe talk about what our favorite sessions were. So the product announcements that happened were obviously Kong 1.0, which is big news for our open source project. Thibault, do you want to say anything about that? I mean, I could talk about it, but it's silly if you're here.
Absolutely, yeah. So Kong 1.0 is for us, a way to labor, the production and the maturity that we've seen with Kong. So we kind of call it like the production mileage that we've seen. We wanted to ship a couple more adjustments to Kong before being able to label it 1.0, and those have now arrived. I'm talking about the plugin development kit, making it easier to write plugins. And I'm talking about the new migrations framework for smoother upgrades. The pull request has just been uploaded yesterday, so it lists all the benefits and everything it improves compared to the older migrations. So we want to make Kong future-proof. And when we're talking about 1.0, we're talking about the stability and how it supported major organizations in the world over the past 3 years, but also how is it going to evolve. And we want to maintain that stability. We want to maintain the notion that we don't want to make, we want to keep improving Kong, but we don't want to, we want to consolidate the ecosystem that we've acquired so far. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, great. And so we'll give you a question, we'll give you a second to talk about 1.0 and ask your questions about it later. But the other things that happened at Summit, Cooper mentioned one of them, which is the launch of the Kong Integrations Hub. So if you have anything that you want to get wider visibility from the Kong community, you should definitely make a pull request to that.
It's on the docs website, so docs.konghq.com. I'm talking about the Git repository.
Yes, yes.
That's where the hub is.
Yes.
Yeah, that's where you send your pull request to, and the contributing file has all the information you need.
Yeah. Cool. And then I think the other product announcements that we did were Kong Cloud, which is a hosted version of Kong Enterprise.
Yes.
And then we announced that we will be putting out sometime later this year, I believe, Brain and Immunity, which are AI-powered like enterprise.
Yeah, so we developed on our vision of what we call the service control platform, which is a way to an umbrella that covers API usage and microservice usage and monitoring and deployment and the routing, kind of like as an umbrella in your company, right? So we have the vision of Kong running in multiple places. So whether that is in the north-south traffic and also in east-west. And for that, we announced also Service Mesh as part of 1.0.
That was the one I forgot.
Not forget it. Yeah. So the service control platform is the vision that enables your organization to have a holistic vision of your cluster and your traffic and your service dependencies. And as part of this vision, there are two products that, like you said, Judith, that are essential and that are that have been demoed as part of the Kong Enterprise and Service Control Platform track. Those were Immunity and Brain. Yes. So Brain is a way to auto configure Kong based on the Swagger generated specifications, and Immunity is what we call anomaly detection, to detect anomalies in your traffic, whether that is potentially a malicious users or a misconfigured client, being able to detect with confidence that a parameter is of the wrong type, etc. Yes, or contains some
anything that looks
sketchy,
weird.
weird
sketchy.
things. Yeah, right. So, exactly. So the demos will be online, I believe, right? And can elaborate.
Yes,
furthermore?
yeah. All the videos are coming out. They all need some editing, so stay tuned for those. But the other thing that happened is we heard from a lot of amazing user stories at the summit. My absolute favorite thing was that Zillow open sourced their Terraform module for deploying Kong into AWS, which I thought was really, really cool. And they gave a great talk that just went from like bare bones, I know nothing about Terraform, to now I understand why this is useful and have some idea about how to do it. So that was my favorite part of Summit. I really loved that.
Yeah.
So did you want to, what did you like best? And we can ask Marcelo too, since he was there.
Yeah, sure. Let's ask Marcelo. I just wanted to elaborate on how the summit was organized. So we had two tracks. We had an industry track. The industry track was where our keynote happened and where some of our enterprise customers came on stage and elaborated on their use cases, or some of the founders or visionaries in the microservices ecosystem came on stage as well and elaborated their vision of what microservices are and what problems they solve and what problems they do not solve.
Yeah.
So we also had interesting visions, point of views from individuals for whom microservices worked or did not work or worked in certain situations.
Yeah.
And then we had the second track, which was the user track, focused on actual, production use cases, maybe more of tricks and tips and how to best use Kong, how to, technical demos of how Kong solve their problems, etc. And we also had the workshops at the end where we learn how to develop plugin, we learn how to use the OpenID Connect plugin, etc. Yeah. And so Marcelo, if you have any thought, like what were your favorite moments during the summit, except being on stage, of course.
You can say that was your favorite. It's okay.
That was awful. That was awful. But so no, I mean, I think everything was great. I think the user track was amazing. I love the workshops. I think they were, quite. I love the idea of having everything, being hands-on and just, dropping in and just being quick, being able to code, and I think that's a, I mentioned this during the workshops, but I think it's the best way for people to learn, right? Just having hands-on, workshop type of training, getting people, to drive that. I think that's amazing. And on the microservices, on the industry track, I think something that was interesting for me is, seeing people saying, "Hey, we went back to the monolith," right? And just, I think it's hard for people to understand that microservices is not for everybody. I mean, it's not for everybody in the sense that it takes a while to make the transition. It's an organizational change. If your organization is not mature enough, or you're not prepared for that, just if you make the jump, it's going to actually hurt you more than it will help. So I think it was good to see that type of contrast. It's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was actually one of my favorite takeaways, not my favorite parts, but takeaways from the summit was the summit was, and our role as an organization is not just to talk about microservices, but it is to prepare for microservices or set expectations, right? And that was really valuable. I think everybody learned a lot.
I think so too.
So everything is on the hashtag on Twitter, Kong Summit. If you want to see pictures or if you want to have some insights, see some quotes. I know a bunch of people posted quotes and favorite moments and everything. So.
Yeah, and one attendee wrote up an amazing event summary, which I will post a link to in our Google Doc, because that was really, really cool. Yeah. So I'm going to give us a quick time check. We have 8 minutes left. Unless anyone has burning questions about the summit, I'd like to move on to 1.0 questions, since we have Thibault here.
Well, we can have questions about the summit and 1.0.
Yes, it's true. We can have questions about anything. So let's just go to the next slide here. As we talked about, here is just a brief rundown. I think we hit most of these except for the little HTTPS health checks and named routes. This is a quick rundown of the things that are new with 1.0. So if you have questions about what any of these bullet points mean, that would be service mesh, the new database abstraction object, removal of deprecated entities, HTTPS health checks, and named routes. If you have any questions about what those bullets mean, or what the implications are, what the benefits are, or any more questions about Summit, we're just going to open it up to you guys.
Or questions? Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I do sort of have one simple question about the named routes. So this is the first time I'm seeing this. I haven't read patch notes or change log or anything just yet. So if this is explained somewhere, I apologize. Are the way that we have things structured at Optum, basically are names required now as part of this for routes?
No, they're not.
Okay. That makes things easier. Thank you.
Yes.
Basically, I'm just trying to figure out, is this a breaking change? I have to worry about it, you know, that kind of thing.
No, they're not. But to elaborate a little bit so everybody has a bit more background context, when we initially redesigned our routing model to have routes and services, the idea was that services represent an existing concept, right? You do have services in your organization, and you need a place to inject them in Kong. That's the service entity. And then the routes were more of a second-class citizen, where they're just what maps to a given service based on rules from the request, but they don't really deserve a name. They're expendable, and there are many, right? No, we thought that would, you know, work well, and we didn't feel the need to give a name to routes. The ask from the community over the last few months on naming routes was really strong. Not only because it makes things convenient to search, so you have a human way of remembering a route stack. A name is a human concept, right? So it's very easy for a human to interact with the IMIN API and retrieve a given route if the human remembers the name. But it is also due to the fact that we added support for put requests and a way to idempotently configure Kong via the IMIN API. And so with the previous model, you were required to generate a UUID, and you had to make sure that, you know, your UID library was, your PRNG was seeded and everything. Like, it was very tricky to get it right, generate the proper UUID, and upload a route, even idempotently. And so then when that route was created, if you were to try to recreate it, the same UID would not necessarily be generated. So you'd be creating multiple routes. So effectively, the put workflow wasn't working too well. So that is why we added names for routes. So you're able to, the resource identifier will be route/route name, and you can create or update a route that is under that resource, just like a service. So it was actually a big community ask, and, you know, it didn't cost us much to do. We do realize that, you know, users probably know how they want to use the product better. So we did it. So yeah.
And if you have any more of those or any feedback,
yeah,
please, like, that's how we make what you want. So
or not about 1.0 specifically, or about the hub. I think we still have Cooper in the room if Cooper wants to intervene. About anything really. Yeah. About community as well, or the community cores.
If you have suggestions, we want them. Cool. Other questions about 1.0 or the summit?
Okay.
I wanted to quickly bring up, since I don't think we've talked about this yet, the removal of deprecated entities from 1.0 and what that might mean, since some people built custom plugins.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a good. Yeah, you're right. It's important to mention it. In 1.0, we are removing everything that we consider deprecated and that we have been maintaining so far. That includes the API entity. That includes, for custom plugins, the way schemas are defined, and some of the globals that are accessible by plugins. So no, before we go further and everybody's scared, those changes are mostly syntax changes, and therefore the best, in the sense that, for example, so first of all, if your plugin does not make any use of the database access layer, you do not need, most likely you do not need any change. But if your plugin exposes a admin API endpoints, or your plugin has custom entities in the database that it stores, you are likely to need to implement some changes. So the way the schemas are defined in the new model is much more declarative, and I would like to say parsable for front ends. So we also have a better error framework. We have more validators that you can specify for if match, if not match, if this set is filled, then that other set must be filled to one off, etc., etc. The framework, the new schema framework is very powerful and almost entirely declarative. We want to rely as less as possible on the self-check function that some of you may have seen contributing or writing your own plugins. The self-check function was kind of a catch-all for all validations, right? So you just wanted some validation rules, on one or n fields, and you just implement it in your function. The problem with that is that a front end such as Conga could not know what were those rules because they're implemented inside of a function. So there is no way for the /schema call to retrieve that schema and build a UI, a form that was powerful enough. So that is one reason behind this change. The other change is the new database access object itself. So the object that makes queries to the database. So now that we've validated the schema, we make the query to the database. What was missing there, what we've improved, is a more modularized database access object and abstraction object. And what that means is that we've refactored a way, like we've refactored some of the internals. We refactored the TTL handling for Postgres for OAuth2 tokens, which is much more performant now. We have greatly improved the modularization around the Cassandra or Postgres, and we're able to make much better improvements in the future and support new, eventually, I don't want to say it, but eventually support new databases much easier. So if your plugin uses a custom DAO entity or declare schemas or anything, you will need some changes, but the structure of plugin generally stays the same. And all of this will be documented in the upgrade path, of course.
Awesome.
I hope I didn't, I wasn't prepared to talk about this for.
No, that's
yes,
great.
but,
I just wanted to mention it since we had so many people who had built plugins.
Right. Yeah.
So with that, we are 1 minute over time. So I'm gonna let everybody go, but just a reminder, if you have remaining questions, please feel free to talk about them in Kong Nation. We're there, we're hanging out, and we wanna answer all of them. So our next call is gonna be on October 16th. So we would be really glad if you join us for that. And thank you very much for coming. This has been really great.
Thank you everybody for coming.
See you next time.
Thank you for putting it on. Have a good one.
Bye.
You too.
Bye,
Bye.
Jeremy.
Bye-bye. See you.
It's trying to land.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Darren.